Hello, everyone. So welcome to my talk. Today, we're going to be talking about how we can actually migrate a large-scale banking app to Compose. And I would love to hear your feedbacks. You can reach me out on Twitter or like in the Q&A session. You can just answer your questions, or I'll be hanging around in the tables after this talk. So, and I'll be sharing the slides. Don't worry, I'll be sharing the slides afterwards. And myself, my name is Fatih. I'm an Android lead at DNB Bank. Most probably you haven't heard DNB Bank, so it's the largest bank in Norway. And yeah, we're working with a couple of apps like savings app, mobile bank app, etc. So yeah, let's talk a bit about Jetpack Compose. So since the Jetpack Compose has joined our lives, like it changed our lives, and literally it's like I have seen a lot of cool examples, cool samples, cool animations, which is only built with Jetpack Compose. But after Jetpack Compose has reached out its stable version, you might be wondering one question, like me or my team. If it was a physical conference, this is the time that I actually ask the attendees about like how many of you actually wondering about this, how to migrate, but I'm just assuming everyone who is attending this presentation is wondering about this. So I'll just skip this. And today's agenda is, first, we're going to be talking about how we can integrate Compose into our existing apps. And then we're going to be talking about some of the interoperability APIs that we can make use of during the migration. And then we're going to talk about the migration strategies that we can use during the migration. And then we're going to jump to our migration journey. We're going to be talking about how it's going, how the migration process is going in DNB, how we plan the migration, and what are the things, like what are the difficulties that we have seen during the migration. And at the end, we're going to talk about our takeaways from this migration. Yeah, so let's get started with Compose integration. So when it comes to integrating Compose into your existing apps, there are two different ways. Like the first one, you can choose to write, like you can just choose to write the screen entirely in Compose. For example, if you're starting with a new feature, then you can just choose to write that screen entirely in Compose. Or you can choose to combine web-based UI and Compose together. So you can either write some composables inside the views, or you can do the other way around. You can write some views inside the composables. So in order to do that, you need some kind of interoperability APIs, right? Like you can't just write composables inside views, because like you can only write composable functions inside the composable functions, called the composable functions from composable functions. So in order to achieve this, you need an interoperability API. So let's go and see what kind of interoperability APIs we have and how we can use them. So the first one is actually coming from the component activity setContent function, which lets you write some composables directly inside its Lambda. So if, for example, you decided to go with writing the composables inside one screen, and that screen is going to be entirely in Compose, then you can choose to use setContent, which is coming from the component activity, and you're just good to go. You can just put your composables inside, and it's going to be composed all in that screen. And then the other functions are, one of them is Compose View, which is a normal Android view, which lets you write some composable inside. What does it do is it just basically gets the composables and binds into the view hierarchy so that you can actually use it like a normal view inside your XML. And the other one is if you want to put some composables inside if you want to put some Android views inside the composable function, then you can choose to use Android view composable. This is not an Android view. This is a composable, by the way, so don't confuse. You can choose to write inside an Android view composable, and then you basically bind the normal Android view inside the composable function. So these are the interoperability APIs, but let's talk more about the migration itself. So what are the migration strategies that we can use during the migration? The first one is called a top-down approach. The other one is called bottom-up approach. So let's start with the top-down approach. Top-down approach is an approach where you start with the topmost view, and then you just go deeper and deeper until you convert innermost elements to composable. So in order to give you an example, let's start with a simple example like this. We have a linear layout, and inside the linear layout, we just have only button. So if we are going to migrate this XML layout to Compose by using top-down approach, then it means that we need to start with the topmost view, which is the linear layout. And then we need to go inside the linear layout and then just migrate every view inside the linear layout, every child of the linear layout. In this case, we only have button. So we're going to start with the linear layout first. We're going to convert linear layout, which is like now we are vertical linear layout. We're going to convert this vertical linear layout to composable. And then in the second step, we're going to convert button to composable. And then we're going to be done with this XML. So, but how are we going to start first? Like if we are just need to convert linear layout to composable, then we can just like, we can just extract the button, or maybe we can extract the button. How are we going to do that? So the first one is like we can just extract the button because you want to only convert linear layout first and then button. Now we have extracted button into another XML, and we only have a linear layout in our fragments XML. And since we're going to write some composable, we need an interoperability API. If you remember, I have talked about compose view, Android view, which lets you write some composables inside it. So we're just going to convert this linear layout to compose view. And then we're going to go to fragment. Now we have a place to write some composable. And we're going to find the equivalent of the vertical linear layout in Compose Word and put it inside this compose view. So let's go to fragment and see how we can do that. In the fragment, we just inflate the XML layout, the fragments XML layout. But in our case, in the XML, we only have a compose view, right? So since we only have a compose view, we can just do this. Like instead of inflating the XML, we can just delete the XML away, and then we can just do this. We can create the compose view programmatically inside the fragments on create view, and then we can just configure this compose view. But how are we going to configure and put some composables inside this compose view? So in order to configure this compose view, we start with the composition strategy. There is an API called setView composition strategy, which lets you handle the disposal of the composition itself. Like you just bind the lifecycle with the composition of the composables, and then whenever, let's say, the lifecycle is destroyed, in this case, the composition is going to be destroyed, canceled, sorry. And we also have a set content API, which lets you write some composable function inside. So whatever you write in the set content API will be shown in this compose view. So in our case, we wanted a vertical linear layout, right? So let's go and find the equivalent of the vertical linear layout. In our case, it's column. Is the equivalent of the vertical linear layout. So now we have actually converted that vertical linear layout to composable. But we still have a button, right? We still have a button in XML, and we need to convert that button to composable. But how are we going to do that? Like we need to just put that Android view inside this composable. And then in the second step, we're going to migrate that button to. If you remember, I have also mentioned about Android view composable, which lets you put some normal Android views inside the composables. So we're going to just use the Android view composable in order to put our button XML inside this composable vertical linear layout, column composable, and it's just going to be done. In our case, like in Android view composable, we have a modifier, we have a factory, we have update, but the only one which I'm interested in right now is the factory, which lets you create the Android view, and then it's going to be inserted in the composable. So in our case, it was an XML like fancy content, which only has a button. We can just inflate it. This inflator is actually coming from the fragment. We can just inflate it. Or since it has only button, you can just do this. Like you can just create the button programmatically inside the Android View Composables factory function. Now we have seen how we can actually migrate vertically in a layout. Let's go and migrate the button, like convert this Android View button to button composable. This is even easier than converting linear layout, because all we need to do is we just need to remove the Android View composable and then do this. Like we have the button composable, and inside that we have the button's title, and it's done. Right now we have actually converted an XML to compose using top-down approach. Now the second one was the bottom-up approach. Let's talk more about bottom-up approach. So in bottom-up approach, you start with the innermost UI elements, and you just go up and up until you reach out to parent view, and then you migrate that parent view to Compose. So let's give another example. In this case, I have added, in order to confuse your minds, I have added another view. I'm just joking. So it's just like in order to give you some more insights how bottom-up approach works, I have just added another view, text view. And if we are going to migrate this XML layout to Compose using bottom-up approach, it means that first we're going to start with either button or text view, and then we're going to go one level up. In our case, it's the linear layout, and then we're going to migrate linear layout, and when we migrate linear layout to Compose, we're done. Let's start with button, and then go with text view, and then third, we go with the linear layout, and then we're done. So in order to, now we're going to do the same actually. In order to write some composable function, we need an interoperability API, which is compose view. We just convert button to compose view, and now we have a place to write some composable function. We go to fragment, and then inside the fragment, we just configure this button compose view, and we just do the same thing. We set composition strategy, and then we set its content, and the content is obviously a button. And then now we are done with the button. We have a linear layout. Inside we have a compose view which shows a button composable, and then after that we also have a text view. Now we go with the text view. We do the same thing. I'm not going to do the fragment thing again, but like consider that I have done the same thing. Like all you need to do is access this text compose view, and then put text composable inside the compose view set content. And then if we're done with text view, how are we going to migrate the linear layout? We can just convert linear layout to compose view, because compose view is not a view group. It's only a view, right? If we convert linear layout to compose view, where are we going to put button compose view and text compose view? So since linear layout is the last view which we are actually migrating to Compose, we can just remove every compose view and have one parent compose view and put everything inside. So you can basically do this. You can just remove all compose views, but we still have the composable functions. You don't need to worry. And then you convert this linear layout to compose view. And now you can just write column, and then inside the column, you just put the composables that we have actually written for button and for text, and just put them inside the column in the fragment level, and then we're done. So we have actually learned about the interoperability APIs. We have learned the migration strategies that we can use, and now it's time to see how we're doing this kind of stuff in DMB, how we're migrating to Compose in DMB. But before start, I would like to give more information about our code base, because I think it's really important to understand first the code base, and then you can actually understand our plan and how the migration is going. So in DMB, we have our own design system, so which is called euphemia design system. You can think this one as the same as material design system, but since we have our own design guidelines and typography, shapes, etc., so we have our own design system. We have created our own design system, and then we have a library called euphemia, and inside the euphemia library we have theming, and we have the core components like euphemia text view, euphemia button, etc. So you can think of, I don't want to confuse your mind, but you can think this component as like material text view, material button, etc. But we have done the same thing, and we also have like a euphemia text view and euphemia button, etc. And now we don't only have this library, but at the same time, like before Compose reached out this stable version, we thought that like all our apps were using actually euphemia library, and they were creating their own components, feature components or UI components inside the apps. And then we saw that, okay, every app is actually creating at some point they're creating the same components, and we need to just make them more consistent. So we thought that, okay, we can create another library. Sorry. I think I missed. Sorry about that. If you want to just check this euphemia design system, you can just go, and it's open source. You can just check it out from this webpage. Sorry. So let's go back to other topic. So we wanted to create another library in order to just reduce the number of components that is being actually duplicated between the apps. And then we said, okay, we have another, we can create another library which uses euphemia, and then our apps can just use this tetris library. We call the this tetris library, and then it's going to be just more consistent across the apps, and the apps doesn't need to deal with the theming or the creating some components, but they can just use the components from the tetris library. So it's a common UI components, like you can think of like a toolbar or cards or anything that is going to be used inside the screens. So in order to visualize this, I've just done this. Like euphemia library has only button, right? So it's the core component. So for example, in euphemia library, if you see this button, in tetris library, we have, like, we're aiming to have this component, not only button, but this kind of component that is actually going to be used inside the apps. And our apps are just going to use tetris library, but not euphemia library, because if they use euphemia library, at some point they create this left component in every app. If they need to create this left component in every app. So we said, let's have the components in another library, and our apps are just going to use the tetris library. So you might be asking, what does it have to do with Compose anyway? But I'm gonna come to that point later. But when it comes to Compose, everything is actually related, not only apps. So like our apps currently are using euphemia library directly, but we have started with the tetris library. Currently, they are not actually using the tetris library, but our aim was actually to use the tetris library in our apps, and tetris library is going to just use the euphemia library. But then when it comes to Compose, now, as you can see, we have a core theming library called euphemia, and we also have another library called tetris, which somehow we need to create it with Compose. And then we also have the apps, right? Every apps we have in DMB, we need to also migrate those apps to Compose. So, but how are we going to deal with all this stuff? How the hell are we going to migrate all this stuff to Compose? So we said, all right, okay, we're going to first start with the theming library, euphemia, and the common UI library, tetris. So we can actually start them together because we have the interoperability API. Tetris is using euphemia. It doesn't matter because we have the interoperability APIs, and we can just make use of them, and we can just start them together. So we split our teams, and then some of my colleagues are working with the euphemia, and some of my colleagues are working with the tetris library. So in euphemia, we said we're going to start with the design system. We're going to first migrate our design system to Compose, like colors, shapes, typography, everything. And then we're going to start with the components. We're going to convert each component to Compose one by one. And at the same time, we're not going to wait euphemia to be migrated to Compose. But at the same time, we can start with tetris library. We have already started with Android views, but we said, okay, just leave it like this. We're not going to continue with this because Compose is more fun, fancy, right? So we just need to create our components as composables from the scratch, and we're not going to use XML. And if there is something that we need from the euphemia side, the core theming library side, that we need to use in the Tetris library, in the common UI library, then we're going to use the Android Viv composable inside the Tetris library. And whenever the composable version of that thing is ready from the euphemia side, we said, okay, we're going to just replace that inside the Tetris. Like, we're going to just remove the Android Viv and then replace it in the Tetris, as we have done before in the examples. And then here's another question: where to start? So I have explained everything, right? Like the theming system and the common UI library, but what is the starting point? Where should we start? So for this one, we also said that we're going to pick one screen in the app, which is basically the simplest screen first we have picked, and then we're going to apply a bottom-up approach to that screen. The reason that we're not actually using top-down approach is basically we didn't like the concept of you need to actually have the Android Viv composable, because you're starting from the top and then you need to insert some Android Vivs inside the composable. Then you need to have an Android Viv composable while you're applying top-down approach. But in bottom-up approach, since it's like component by component and you're starting from the innermost UI element, then it was just compose views, and I think it was easier and we picked this approach. And after that, create components. We need to create components in Tetris and euphemia if it's needed, and we just need to iterate this process for all screens. So yeah, whenever, like, the first screen is, I should say, the first screen is actually the hardest one. But whenever you migrate more screens, it becomes easier, because like in the second screen or in the later screens, there might be some components that you have already created in the common UI library, Tetris library, or in the euphemia, in the core library. So it's becoming easier and easier when you migrate more screens. And during the migration, we said like our graph, our process is going to be looking like this. Like, our apps are using the Tetris Compose library, which is actually using both the euphemia Compose and euphemia, the legacy Android Viv library. So if there is something that is not ready, it's picking from the legacy Android Viv euphemia library. Or if it's something ready from the euphemia Compose library, then it's just using from the euphemia Compose library. And after migration, we are planning to have something like this. Our apps are just using the Tetris Compose library, and Tetris Compose library just uses euphemia Compose library. So now we have talked about euphemia and Tetris, like the common UI library and the core theming library. But we haven't talked really much about our apps. I think they are a little bit harder than the libraries, because in libraries you only have the components. You just need to convert them to composable. But in apps, you actually have a lot of things like fragments, activities, navigation, etc., those kind of things. So let's talk more about that part. In our current Viv layer, actually we're following a single activity with fragment approach, MVVM, etc. So we have a single activity, and inside the single activity we have fragments, and we are using Jetpack navigation. If we convert everything to Compose, at the end, what we are aiming to reach is this one. In the Viv layer, we will have an activity, and inside the activity, we're not going to have any fragments, and we're only going to have Compose. So it means that, like, no fragments, activity just sets the content, and we just need to navigate between composables now instead of navigating between fragments or activity. And it requires some kind of navigation library in order to reach this one. Or if you don't want to just have an in-house solution, you need to use some kind of Compose navigation library. So in our case, it means that we need to replace the Jetpack navigation library with Compose navigation library. So that was something that is a question mark there. So do we really want to do it in this migration? and we're going to be talking later. So here's this question then. How are we going to replace Fragment with composables? Or we said that we're not going to have any fragments, then how are we going to replace it? We said we're not going to do it for now, but it's just for now. We're going to do it later, but in this migration, we're not going to do it for now. But then how it is going to look like? It's going to look like something like this. So we will have an activity. We have a fragment, and inside the fragment, we will have our composables. So how are we going to achieve this? We're going to achieve it with using compose view inside the fragments. By doing that, we only change the way the views are presented, and we don't need to change anything in terms of navigation or anything in the business layer. And after all screens are migrated, we're going to remove fragments. That is going to be another migration or another step. So we don't need to do everything in this migration. So we're just going to do it later on after this migration. So I have presented this to my colleagues, and then one of my colleagues said that, hey, this looks cool, but we need some kind of POC, like proof of concept, because they really wanted to see that it's actually working in our code base. So in order to satisfy them and convince them to use Compose in our app, I just picked the simplest screen that we actually have. It doesn't do anything. It just makes it doesn't make an API call. It just saves value in the shared preferences. So I picked this screen because it also has a fewer number of components than the other screens. So it has a toolbar, header, and selectable item, and I thought that, okay, this is the simplest screen. I just need to create 3 composables, and then I'm done, and I can just show it to my colleagues. And by that time, I was using Android Studio Bumblebee Canary 1, Android Gradle plugin 710 Alpha 01, and Kotlin version was 1.5.21, and Compose 1.101. So in order to achieve this version, especially for Android Gradle plugin, I needed to bump the Android Gradle plugin version because we were using some older version, like 4 point something. So I needed to bump the Gradle version, and then I was just thinking, okay, I'm just gonna hit this Gradle sync button, and then I just need to write 3 composables, and then I just need to run the app, and I'm done. But apparently it was not like that. If you have ever migrated from Android Gradle plugin version 4 point something to 7, then you know what I'm talking about actually. So when I pressed the sync button, I got this issue. Like the first issue I got was we were using a plugin called Gradle Android Cache Fix plugin, and it was not compatible with the AGP version that I was using. So the solution was either bypassing the version check or comment out the plugin. So we were already going to remove that plugin, and I thought, okay, I'm just commenting it out. So I could have bypassed the version check, but since it's a POC, I just commented out the plugin, and then I hit the sync button again, and I got another issue. This issue is about Reheal. So apparently Reheal has a bug with the AGP version that I was using. So then I updated the AGP version to Alpha 06, and it was solved. And then I hit the button again, and I got another issue this time. This is something related with the meta information being found in 2 places. So the solution was just excluding the meta information in the packaging options. And I was thinking I'm done, but I wasn't done, obviously. So I had another issue, which is I can't really read it. I don't really know. Yeah, this was about some Kotlin version, another Kotlin version being used, if I remember correctly. So I just updated all Kotlin versions to the same version, and then finally I got the Gradle sync successfully, and then now it's time to write some composables. I have written the composables, which was didn't take so much time. So toolbar, header, selectable item. And then I was just thinking, okay, now it's just gonna work, but obviously it didn't work. So I got this error. It's complaining about some Weave3 lifecycle opener not found in constraint layout. And at the first sight, I thought it's something related with constraint layout. And I just bumped the version. but it didn't help. And then I realized that if I just have searched View3 Lifecycle Opener, Compose View issue or something, then I could have actually realized, or if I checked the documentation correctly, they have written specifically for this one that you need to use the activity version 1.3 or higher in order to like set the View3 Lifecycle Opener that the Compose view requires. So I just bumped the activity version to 1.3.0, and then finally I am done with the POC. I have shown it to my friends, and then they were really happy. They seemed like convinced about the Compose because it's working in our code base, and they were also excited. And then we just started the process after this POC. So what is the migration status in DMB? So how is it going? So it's going fine. We have started with euphemia. As I said, we have picked one screen, and then we started creating the components for the screen. But before even creating those screens, we needed to migrate the theming, our theming system, like from the style XML, theme XML, whatever XML do you have. Like we needed to convert our colors, typography, and shape, and it's done. And we have core components, Tetris, and our apps are still work in progress. We're iterating through everything screen, and they're still work in progress. So what is our takeaways? Like my team's takeaway was, I would say the most important thing is plan your migration first. Before planning, don't go to that side. Don't take that way. Like just first, before starting the migration, plan your migration very well. Sit down and talk with your friends about the plan, and then do some POCs in your existing code base. As you have seen, in our case, it was like it fixed a lot of things, and our friend just started using Compose without having any AGP issue, any health issue, etc. So I have already fixed those stuff in POC. So POC helps you to see and think about the issues you might not think. And please migrate slowly. Don't try to migrate everything. So for example, if you have a component, you can also migrate that component and use it everywhere. But like, please do it slowly because it's going to affect each and every screen. So don't hesitate, you and your colleagues, and just do it very slowly. And make use of the interoperability APIs that we have mentioned, like Compose View, Android View, Composable, or if you want to just go with only Compose, you can just use component activity.setComponent. And last, maybe the most important thing is to stick to the migration plan. Don't change the plan during the migration. If you change it, then you're going to see a lot of difficulties. So please stick to the migration plan. Yeah, that was it. If you have any questions, we can go for Q&A. But before going for Q&A, I have one thing. I don't know if I should say it out loud, but we are hiring. If you want to come and work with these technologies, just go our LinkedIn webpage and check it out. Yeah, we can go for a Q&A session. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, indeed. I mean, it was very good. It's even better than I expected, and I expected a lot, I have to say. As I said, I never seen a complete, journey about migrating to Compose or even introducing Compose in the application, in a real application. So I really liked, especially your advice at the end. And I can just say that creating a POC before trying out a certain technology, whether it's Compose or anything else, is a very good idea. So
yeah,
thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you. Like, it's really good to hear that. Like, I have also seen a lot of, not a lot of companies, but some of the companies are actually following the same approach that is mentioned in this talk. So I was really happy. So yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of more content about this migration strategy later on. But since it just reached out its stable version, and most of the companies are still working with the Compose, I think, yeah, it's going to take some time.
Okay, cool. So let's go into the questions and answers. I see
Yeah,
there's
sure.
already a bunch of questions, so there's no limit
Wow.
for
All right.
looking at it. I will show them on stage. So let's start with the most upvoted one. I hope you can see it. It's from Michael. So the question is, do you plan to measure performance of migrated screens to make sure that the new solution is as performant as old use? By the way, great presentation. I can only agree with that, but that's not the part of the question. So
yeah, thank you so much. I'm please sorry if I pronounce it wrong, Michal. So thank you so much. And for this question, by the way, like we're still working, like the migration is still working in progress, and we haven't actually seen any performance issue. Like we haven't actually measured the performance in advance. But if you just like we have tested and there was no performance issue that we have seen for now, because we haven't done with the migration yet. We're still working with it. So, I mean, for this one, we haven't seen any performance issue for now.
Okay, so I hope it's answered. Let's see the next question. So it's from my co-organizer, actually, Gabor.
Yeah, okay.
So his question is, do you expect the migration from navigation to navigation compose and the removal of support for parseable/serializable argument types to cause any trouble down the line?
Yeah, so we haven't planned this in advance, so we have just said we're going to go with this one. So like if we go with the first one, so like from navigation to navigation compose is going to be another process, which is going to take, I think, a lot of time, because navigation is at the heart of our like Jetpack navigation is at the heart of our apps. So we're going to take it, and like we're going to plan differently, and we're going to just have it in the next step. Like, to be honest, I haven't really checked navigation compose library and how they are actually dealing with the parseable serializable arguments. So I think I don't have any answer for this one, sorry.
I think it's okay. I will mark it as answered still. Let's see the next one. So it's a question from Hossein Abbasi. So is there any platform like Lotifies.com for Jetpack Compose? And so if anyone maybe not know, Lotifies is creating animations. But as far as I know as well, it can be done with Jetpack Compose, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, they have a support, like the Lottie has a support for Compose. So
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So basically, that's the answer.
Yeah,
you can still use Lottie, right?
Lottie Android has a support for Jetpack Compose. So it shouldn't be an issue about converting the Lottie stuff to Compose.
Cool. I actually didn't know that. That's useful for me. Okay, so the next one. So I hope I will pronounce later correctly, but Goksu Turker asks, as far as I understand from interoperability, you didn't convert it 100% to Compose. In which situations did you have difficulty converting views to Compose?
Yeah, I think this is a good question. So as Göksu said, we haven't really converted to 100% Compose. It's still work in progress, and this was the plan, and we're working with this, like we're working based on this plan. But I think one of the difficulties that we have, like maybe the most important one that I haven't mentioned in the presentation, was the testing. So we have like if you need to test the compose, you can test the compose with the normal views, but then you actually need to use some compose rule in your UI test, and then if you need to just use it, find the view by ID, then you're not going to be able to do it like using Espresso if you have already converted that view to compose. Like for example, if you have a view which is converted to compose, and you're trying to find that view with ID on Espresso, like on view with ID using Espresso, then you're not going to be able to find that. But if you use some other APIs like with text, etc. So you can find it. So like in short, I think like the difficulty that we were having was creating, like converting also tests to compose. It was not like creating some composables and then you're done, but also we needed to, in the app side, we need to convert our UI test to compose. I think this was a bit difficult, but of course it's not like impossible, but it's a bit difficult for us because we were using a lot of things like with ID, etc. So we needed to replace those stuff with either using compose rule and find the composable, or replace it with text, etc.
Okay, cool. Thanks. So the next question is coming from Emmanuel Guerra. Talking about interoperability again, how does Compose behaves when you update the Compose view with send content multiple times? And sorry for asking, but please be brief because we are getting late and there's still a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So like, how does Compose behaves when you update the Compose view with set content multiple times? So when you use the set, it actually depends on, like, you just set content once, and then the composition happens based on the state, etc. So basically, you just set content once, and the composition itself is another thing, and you have the lifecycle, which is another thing. You just bind them with set views, lifecycle strategy, and the composition itself is based on the states. I mean, it's just going to work if you're like, it's just going to work correct if you're using states in composables correctly. So it doesn't, I think, have to do with anything with set content, but it's something, yeah.
Okay, so next one from Harun Turguklu. How does Compose works? How multiple screen support works in Compose? Sorry.
Multiple screen support in Compose. So
I think you talked about still using fragments, right? So I'm not 100% sure what the question is about, whether do you do multiple screens with Compose or with Fragment, but if you can touch on both points, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, we're not like with multiple screens. Maybe it's like if you mean that it's like foldable phones, etc., then it's just going to work, I guess. I haven't tested out because we haven't really supported that multiple screens, etc. So I haven't tested that one.
Yeah, it's okay. And move on. So another one from Mahmoud. What about using XML layouts with Android View in terms of performance? It's an interesting question, I think.
XML layouts with Android View. Android, is it Compose View or Android? You mean like maybe because
I think he means when you use an existing Android View in Compose, or maybe he means the Compose using in Android.
Okay. Maybe
both.
Maybe it's like using the Android views inside the composables. So basically, we didn't care about those because like if you just need to maybe use the Android view composable when you're migrating. After you're done with migration, like you don't need to have the Android view because you're trying to get rid of the Android view composable and Android views, right? So the only thing that I can think of is like if you for some reason have a view which cannot be converted to Compose, then you see that one. But all our views were the views that we have created, so we haven't actually seen any issue because we were just going screen by screen, and at the end of migration of that screen, we don't have any Android view composable.
Okay, there's still a lot of questions, but we are running out of time, so I will have time for one more. So do you want to choose one, Fatih? What would you like to answer?
All right, okay, so maybe one. So what benefits do you see in favor of removing fragments and keep only composables at top level? So yeah, I think it's a good question. The benefits that I can see is like, first, we're going to have only composables. Like I have seen, to be honest, I have seen some issues using Compose view inside fragments in terms of performance. Like I haven't seen, but I have read an article. So maybe having only composable might remove if there's any chance of reducing the performance. And other than that, maybe like having only composables, like it's just having composables instead of fragments. Yeah, I think I can only think of this one.
Okay, yeah, then thanks again, and sorry for the ones that are not answered, but Fatih said that he will hang around after the talk, so you can maybe ask directly. And let's have a quick break before the next talk. We will be back in around 5-ish minutes, so thanks again, Fatih.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a nice day.